Welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast by Venus O'Hara. I'm here to welcome you into the world of orgasmic living by hosting experts to discuss orgasmic topics such as nutrition, spirituality, personal development, sexuality, and much more. Here, we will offer lifestyle lessons that can help you lead a fulfilling, joyous, and orgasmic lifestyle. I'm your guide, Venus O'Hara. Welcome to the 59th episode of the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast with Venus O'Hara. In this new moon episode, we'll be discussing sexual healing, and we'll be speaking with Aliza Zipursky, author of Healing Honestly, The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcoming Self-Blame and Self-Shame. Then I'll be discussing the series Tell Me You Love Me on HBO. Then finally, we'll be experiencing a guided meditation with survivor healing affirmations. But first, let me share with you my experience as a survivor and my healing process. I missed a podcast episode. If you're a regular listener, you will know that I publish on new moon and full moon. And for the last full moon, I just got back from Berlin and I was exhausted. Oh my God. I had very good intentions of producing the episode and publishing it a couple of days late, but my good intentions got forgotten. And I thought I would give myself some self-compassion because I was very tired. I had a lot going on in my personal and professional life. I've just come back from an incredible fair in Berlin called Sex Tech Berlin, where I hosted a conference. I gave a speech about the VR of the body, and I shared information about my erotic stories that are available on the Satisfyer Connect app. It's interesting because some of these stories I wrote in a way that was very orgasmic for me, and without having intentions of certain things or certain attributes that they have. I'm ticking many boxes in them. For example, obviously my stories are real, based on real people, real experiences, and to protect the identity of my beloved muses, I just don't describe the people, the protagonists. I don't describe them physically or age or what they're wearing, just to protect their identity, basically. However, this detail means that anyone listening to my stories can imagine anyone they like, which is actually very powerful. And also, there's an acknowledgement of intrusive thoughts, such as being doggy style in the bed, and then someone's behind you and you're thinking, oh, did I close the windows? Can I moan? Things like that. And also body confidence and challenging stereotypes about body image and seduction and what we think about when we think about seduction. For example, there's a story called Seducing in Sweatpants, where it might not sound sexy, because normally when we think about preparing for sex or a lover coming, we might think of nice lingerie, red lipstick, high heels, low-cut tops, short skirts, etc. Whereas I'm talking about no makeup, messy bun, a hoodie, and slippers that were falling apart. So it's a very different way of seducing. Yes, there's a bit of humour in there as well, because I think complicity and humour are incredible elements of complicity in a couple. So that's a bit about what I have been up to professionally, and it's been very intense travelling. And the Sex Tech Fair was incredible. It was an opportunity to meet people from my sector, because often when I'm making content, like I'm now at home speaking to the wall and not really thinking about who's listening to this or how it might be impacting them. And I met a couple of people who were very inspired by my podcast, someone who has taken the plunge and decided to work in this sector of sex tech, and they are encountering all of the challenges that I encountered many years ago, and you're thinking, oh, what are people going to think? Are people going to judge me? And all of that. So I did make an episode about my own journey in that respect, and they found it inspiring. So it's really wonderful to speak to my wall, and then know that on the other side, there are people who are really listening. But speaking of self-compassion, which is the reason why I have missed out on an episode, is that this episode is going to be, I'm going to interview Aliza Zipursky, and she is the author of the book Healing Honestly. And this is a book about childhood sex abuse, because after all, sex is not always orgasmic. Sex is the most powerful emotion, I think, and one of the most powerful things in life. But it's something that can be destructive if not utilized in a good way with a good intention. And I'm actually a survivor of this, and it's something that has, it has been present very much in my life, especially during my younger years when I was coming to terms with coming of age and just trying to kind of, work things out, after having a very Catholic upbringing and trying to, living in a society where all these female magazines were quite sex positive, and then I'm coming from a place of silence, and then also having experienced abusive situations that really were challenging for me, because I think there was a whole kind of range of emotions that happens, or a sequence of emotions. At first it's kind of sadness, why wasn't I protected? And then that becomes anger, and then it gets to a point where now I've let go of these things that happened to me, and I've just take it as another experience, and some experiences are good and some are bad, but everything ultimately will teach you something. And I did do a lot of therapy, and what was really intriguing for me when I was reading this book about Healing Honestly was the first chapter, I think if I remember correctly now, because it's been a couple of months since I read the book, was about how you remember a traumatic abusive situation. And for me it was something that I was with a guy, and then it was all a very consensual situation, and then we were doing something that provoked this flashback in me to a much younger time in a scenario that I wasn't really aware that was sexual and abusive. And it's something that I had buried in my subconscious, and suddenly it came to the surface, and I realized it was something, it's something that didn't happen one time, it was repeated. And it was a bit of oh my God, I froze. And then soon after, it kind of was polluting all of my sexual life, and I decided to get therapy. And fortunately, in the UK, I was at university at the time, I was able to get free counselling, which is just absolutely wonderful, to have the opportunity to speak to a professional and offload all of my worries and experiences with someone who was impartial. And so that's what I did, and I would recommend anyone to do the same thing. Definitely therapy was something that helped me. But it got to a point where I found that the therapist, I went through 3 therapists, I think. It got to a point where the therapist, I stopped going because the therapist was kind of, I think it was very Freudian and just matching everything from my present life to my past life. And I just think, trying to join dots that I didn't really want to be joined. I just don't think everything is related to one incident in the past. And that's how it felt for me. It didn't feel very empowering in the end. It was very good to offload in the beginning, and then I got to a point where it's time to let go now and just carry on with my life and move on and not be so stuck in the past and identifying with this incident, because in life there are going to be many, many challenges, and you can't just focus on one from the past. I think we have to move on at a certain point. But it's very important to address these things, because otherwise they will come out sooner or later. And sex is something that, with other traumas, let's say, alcohol or drugs, those are things that you should and must give up if they are having a negative effect on you. But with sex, it's something that you have to kind of recalibrate how you see it, how you live it, in order for it not to be destructive. Because it's, having had negative sexual experiences and not experiencing pleasure can really impact your intimate relationships. And I think love and making love is one of the most beautiful things that you can share with someone. And you don't want to be missing out on that because of something in the past. So it's definitely worth trying to address it and heal from it. And in this book, Healing Honestly, I was going to interview Aliza kind of sooner than what we did. I was going to read the book in a fast way, but then I decided, actually, no, I needed to postpone our interview so that I could really take this information in, because it was a lot to digest. And it's it's a great book for anyone who's interested. And we will talk more in detail about that right now. Are you looking for a new sex toy? If you are, go to satisfier.com and you can use the code Venus to get 30% off anything on the satisfier.com website. So check it out, Venus for 30% off, satisfier.com. Now it's time for this episode's interview. We'll be speaking with Aliza Zipursky, author of Healing Honestly, the messy and magnificent path to overcoming self-blame and self-shame. Aliza Zipursky, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview today. I'm very happy to have you here. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here with you. So I am a writer and a speaker and a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And my work all revolves around supporting adult survivors like myself in healing and living full and vibrant and colorful and messy lives. And so that first started with launching my website, healinghonestly.com, back in 2017, just as a place on the internet to be able to talk about these like highly stigmatized issues, but in a way that felt lighter and freer, and used regular schmegular language to talk about how our trauma was impacting our sex lives and our dating lives and our friendships. And that work evolved into speaking all around the United States, as well as in June, my first book, Healing Honestly, The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcoming Self-Blame and Self-Shame, was published in June of this year. And it is a survivor to survivor conversational guide and book to help support survivors in their own healing. It's sort of like replicating the role of a trusted friend who's like, we can make jokes here, we can be lost together, we can navigate this together, we can be messy and colorful and ourselves together.
So was it completely by chance that this kind of became your job?
In a sense, when I first started writing, I really felt like profoundly isolated. I was 27 years old. I was dealing with all of these questions around childhood sexual abuse, which you might hear me refer to as CSA for shorthand. And I was looking online for just like people like me, just to find myself. And what I kept finding was either resources written by medical professionals that left me feeling like I was some sort of like lab rat they were studying, and made me feel like I was fated to like all of these terrible outcomes. Or I was reading a lot of memoir, which is a beautiful art form, but for me was really re-traumatizing. And it wasn't helpful to read about, the sort of what happened to other people. I was looking for a place that was like, well, what now? Like this happened, but like, now what do we do? Like, now we have to live the rest of our lives. And I still want like a big, beautiful, badass life. Like, how do I do that? And so I just started putting things up on the internet, and I never expected it to become sort of my full-time job. I didn't want to put that on myself in my own healing. I didn't want to feel that kind of pressure. But over time, my healing grew and my work grew. And I realized, no, I'm actually ready now to be all in this space. But it took time.
It must be tricky, because I imagine sometimes it can be, there's a healing component, but I imagine other times it could be a reminder and you're never kind of getting over it, or you could be reminded too much. How does it feel?
Absolutely. And I think that for as much as this work brings me healing, and there's a turn of phrase, and I have no idea who originated it, even though I've tried to find, but the sort of phrase of like, be who you needed when you were younger. And in embodying that and letting that guide me has been a really healing force in my life. And at the same time, a lot of this work is in direct conflict with my healing, and is re-traumatizing and is triggering. And so it just when I think I have it all figured out, I never do. And what's really helped me is to have so many friends and community members and fellow survivors who've been doing this work far longer than me, whose friendship and leadership and guidance has really helped me see like, that's okay. And it's okay to need to take breaks. And this is how you can, continue to practice and experiment with caring for yourself while doing this work. So seeing that the people I admired were also found this work still traumatizing and triggering, has been a really helpful way, and their wisdom has really helped me find my own path forward.
Great. So I've just finished reading Healing Honestly myself, and I'm pleasantly surprised that I didn't find it triggering myself as a survivor. I mean, it's something that I think it depends on which stage you're at in your journey of healing. I think for me, I'm quite an advanced stage. I mean, for my personal experience has been at first something I'm going to ask you about in a minute about, remembering abuse when you're an adult, which is something that happened to me, but I never knew that it was something that was quite common. And so I kind of remembered this thing that I had counseling for it. And there were emotions of sadness and frustration and anger. Like, why wasn't I protected? And not knowing that I couldn't share that with anyone who should have protected me, because it would have been taboo, like Catholic family and all this. So it was very hard to deal with, like a cross to bear. And then you have to kind of like have these physical things. And if you want to have a full sexual life, then you're doing things that kind of maybe were done to you out of context or without consent. But I mean, for me, I'm a very sexual person. Obviously, I have a sex podcast, so I've gotten over that. But I think some of the things that I was enjoying, let's say like BDSM, when I realized there could have been, a link to, wanting to dominate because I'd been abused myself, trying to get that power back, in a lot of ways. And then I got to a point where I have just let go, and it just feels like I don't think survivor is part of my identity. It's something that happened to me, but it's not who I am. So I think there's a whole, for me now, it's just like, it's not something I think about too much. But I think the Me Too movement helped, but I'll talk about that later. But let's going back to these memories. This is something that really I thought it was just my own experience. So, and I found in your book that it's something that's quite common. So people who are in their adult years suddenly having a memory, remembering something that has been, in the subconscious for a long, long time, and then it becomes to the forefront of their minds. Could you explain more about this?
Absolutely. This is a topic I am super duper passionate about. I actually just presented in August at the National Sexual Assault Conference in San Francisco here in the US on traumatic memory and childhood sexual abuse survivors. And it was so humbling because there are all these advocates in the room who've devoted their whole career and lives to supporting survivors. And they were like, I never knew that this was totally normal and common, and like that this is actually a really, I thought I was the only one, or I felt like I couldn't integrate this part of my story into my work. And anyway, so even those of us that have like spent a lot of time in this field, it can often be a misunderstood or under discussed aspect of healing and living with trauma. But the gist of it is that our brains on trauma, when we're being traumatized and actively harmed, our brains do a whole bunch of different sophisticated things to help us survive that moment. And none of those things are anything we have control over. So our brains might actively repress memories and that are happening, that are of harm, but also our brains might never even go through the process of creating the memory to begin with. As in the process of our brain, sort of, if you think of it as an old school VCR recording, might never have hit record to begin with to create a memory to even be stored. So what's important is there are lots of ways to not remember.
Mm.
And none of them are anything we have control over. And that can be equal parts liberating to
Mm.
realize, oh, it's not our fault that we don't remember things. And it doesn't mean that the pain we've been through counts any less.
Mm.
And also, it can be frustrating because some people can spend years and years in different healing modalities trying to recover memories that, to no fault of their own, just may have never been created to begin with, because our brains in moments of crisis and survival do a whole host of things to survive, that we don't control and we don't choose. And so that's sort of as deep as I want to get on the neuroscience part
Mm.
of it, because I'm not a scientist. I just hang out with some really wonderful ones that help me understand these things. But for me, I grew up not being aware that I had been sexually abused. And I experienced a second trauma in my life, the trauma of a parent dying, um, and watching that parent die and caring for them. And in that trauma, it actually triggered my childhood abuse. And that's not an uncommon pattern where we go about our lives a certain way and then shit hits the fan.
Mm.
And it might be seemingly unrelated. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe you just left home and you went to college and you're actually really excited about college. And you get to college and you're out of that danger zone. And now you're flooded with these realizations. Or you're going through a different transition in your life. Maybe you're going through menopause. Maybe, like going through some other aspect of life and then starting to what I would call like recover or start to understand that some fucked up shit went down when we were kids. And it doesn't come back as this in this nice, neat, little, cute, pretty way. With healthy memories, we remember the beginning and we remember the middle and we remember the end. And maybe we don't remember all the details, but we could like tell a happy memory in sort of like a story, with that beginning, middle, and end. But with traumatic memory, it's what I call non-narrative. It's feelings, it's senses. So it might be a smell, it might be a sound, it might be the way something feels, it might be a flash of something we see in a dream or a nightmare. And
Mm.
so when they come back to us, it can be really, really confusing. And often it leads people to be like, what? Why now? Like,
Mm.
what the hell? Like, I was fine for so long. Why am I suddenly freaking out? And that can be like deeply isolating. But the fact of the matter is it's like a completely normal pattern for our brains on trauma, especially when we experience something as traumatic as this at such a young age. And so I work with survivors who are coming to that oh shit moment in their 20s, like I did. I work with survivors who are coming to the oh shit moment in their 70s.
Wow.
You don't get to decide when the oh shit starts, just like you don't get to decide how you do and don't remember.
Mm.
And what comes back to people is all totally different. And what's most important, and the thing that I like most want to express, is that like this is nothing to feel shame or self-blame over, because this is actually a completely normal, scientifically understood aspect of our brains on trauma. And even though the world makes us feel like, okay, we're not going to be believed because unless we can like answer all these questions or we have all this proof, that's the world's fucking problem. And that's the world we live in that is full of rape culture that says, every survivor, like there's some real survivor out there and you don't get to count. It's the lie that that our stories are never worthy of the care and seriousness that they are. But that's their problem. Like for you, for each of us, our pain is real and it matters no matter the way memory works for us.
Mm. Another thing that's intriguing about memory, you talked about the brain, how it protects us. What about the body and how that stores trauma? Because I've heard of people going to different types of massage or something with the body, and then something is released, and then they start crying and they have this big reaction. And you mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I've had that on my list for a long time, but I might reconsider now after what you said about it. I think it's interesting, that whole concept about the emotional cause of some aches and pains in our bodies.
Yeah, yeah. I think The Body Keeps the Score, written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, is a really important contribution to like this conversation of understanding that our bodies store trauma and that often our bodies are like signaling to us that shit isn't okay. And our bodies are doing that more clearly before we catch on with our minds. And that's like a very important thing. And but I am critical of him. I think the book was really not written for survivors specifically to read it. It was written definitely for other clinicians. And so I find there's a lot of like re-traumatizing stuff in there, but the gist of it is that our bodies know, and that, you know, at some point in time, if we start tuning into our bodies, whether it's our patterns with chronic pain, whether it's showing up in our sex lives, whether it's showing up in the way we experience touch, that our bodies are often giving us signals that things aren't okay or things that weren't okay happen to us before our minds are really clear on that. And so I know a lot of survivors who do a lot of talk therapy and stuff like that, and also a lot who go and do somatic therapy and therapy that's more focused in the body and body experiences. And I think that that's beautiful and amazing too. And so, you know, I think at its core is our body stores a lot of wisdom. Our brains have had to live in this world that constantly tells us that survivors' pain and truth don't get to count. And so our brains have been impacted by that bullshit since the dawn of time. It's in every movie. It's in the movies we watch. It's in the TV shows we watch. It's in what we see in the news. Like, it's not our fault. Like, and it's the way possibly people in our lives have treated us. But our bodies are telling the truth. And so I think it's really important to listen when our bodies are talking and pay attention to the wisdom that's stored within them.
You just mentioned talk therapy there, and it reminded me of when I did therapy. And the reason why I stopped was because I think at first talk therapy can be very cathartic. You get, you know, get this big weight off your shoulder. You express things to someone who's impartial and listening to you without judgment. But after a while, I thought, for me, this person was maybe too Freudian and linking everything in my present life at the time back to childhood sexual abuse or trauma or boundaries being just abuse in general. And I just got to a point where I thought, is this helpful? How much therapy should we do? Was there a point where you have to stop looking at the past and just let go of it? I mean, that's something that I ask myself sometimes.
I think what's so dope is that like there are so many different kinds of therapeutic modalities out there. Like I would not do well in a psychoanalyst chair.
Yeah.
And I have found myself in those positions. And then as soon as I realized what was going on, I was like, I'm out of here. You know, and so the therapy that I do is really focused on the present day and the here and the now. And that has been a really good and useful tool in my life. But it's, you know, it's different for everybody. And that's the beautiful thing about healing too, is that all of our journeys are different. Everything we need is different for each other. And the shit changes all the time. You know, the shit that I needed 10 years ago is like radically different than what I need now, which is probably different than what I'll need in the future. And so, you know, it's kind of funny about writing this book is like, even though I might have used the word guide before, I'm like, it's only because I don't know another word, but it's not prescriptive. I think anybody who tries to tell you that there is a specific path towards healing or a prescriptive path is like full of absolute shit. Because it's different for all of us and it's different all the time. And I think it's really important to listen to that like inner expert that lives inside of each of us that tells us like, maybe this shit isn't for me. So like you're sitting in that therapist's office and you're like hearing what they're saying and you're like, you know, it sounds like to me, Venus, like there was an inner expert that went off inside of you that was like,
my body was saying no.
Yeah, was like, this is not what is in alignment with my safety and my healing right now. You know, and like to me, I'm not interested, like I'm less interested in like the specifics of like what somebody's body tells them is what they need for their safety and healing. And I'm more interested in them just listening to it no matter what it says, you know, no matter what it is, like listening to that, taking those signals seriously and being like, oh no, like that actually matters, that I feel physically like unwell in this space. My stomach's coming into knots, I'm
Mm,
sweating, or I'm like uncomfortable, you know, like listening to those signals and being like, that's actually valuable information.
mm,
Even if your rational mind is like, no, 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 like you need this. Like,
mm.
you know, it's important to listen to what our bodies tell us we actually need for our safety and healing. And that can be a tricky thing for us to practice.
Yeah, especially because you give so much maybe faith to people in the medical profession, whatever the role they have. And I think we should maybe have a bit more autonomy with knowing what's best for us. Mm,
Absolutely. And I spent a lot of time working with medical professionals and
mm,
speaking to them and saying, you all need to be working on honoring the wisdom and expertise that survivors have within themselves when they
mm,
walk into the room.
mm,
That actually, a lot of times, we know what we need,
mm,
but nobody's asking us. You know, I did this one training for medical professionals about trauma informed care. And I was the one like non-medical professional on the panel,
mm,
supposed to bringing in like sort of the survivor voice. Um, and they're all like sharing all of these practices of we do this to make the patients more comfortable, we do that to make the patients more, you know, and so on and so forth. And then towards the end, I just sort of raised my hand and I said, you know, have any of you ever thought of like on the intake forms that everybody has to fill out, asking them, is there anything we can do to make you feel more comfortable while you're here?
mm,
Like, have you ever just like asked? Because if I was asked, I might say things like, oh, I need you before you touch me to tell me you're going to touch me, to tell me the pressure I'm going to experience, to allow me to direct you when I'm ready. Or I need to like actually have headphones on and be listening to something that is distracting me because this actually might be like a triggering exam and I just need to like feel safer by doing, you know, like the things that I could actually come up with if asked.
mm. I think a lot of gynecologists could benefit from that because I think a
Right?
lot of times when I've been to a gynecologist, even though I'm a sex toy reviewer, I'm very familiar
Yes.
with that type of exploration. But when you're in that situation, you're just tight and you're really tense, and they just don't take that into consideration. They're just like boom up with the speculum and opening. It's like, hi, wait,
Absolutely.
and it's a massive trauma for me because I had this serious problem when I had kidney infections when I was a child. So
Oh
I've had a lot of
no. Yeah.
interventions and catheters. I had all this stuff happening to me very young. So being on a medical table, opening my legs on stirrups is like very, very traumatic.
Yes.
But no one cares. Like, oh, this is nothing. This is like doesn't hurt. And it's like saying you don't know. Maybe it's not for you, but I mean, for me, if I'm only doing this once a
Exactly.
year, then it is kind of traumatic, you know. So, and then people don't go to the doctor just for the
Absolutely, which is the worst
yeah.
possible option, right? Is that then we don't even feel safe accessing the care that we need. You know, I found that I have found that, you know, all throughout my different experiences within the healthcare system. I'm working with some, I'm pregnant right now.
Oh
I'm almost
wow.
7 months pregnant. I'm my first pregnancy ever. And it's been really illuminating. And I found these like really dope, amazing nurse midwives who are like the trauma informed like clinicians of my fucking dreams. And I'm like,
Mm.
this is what it could have felt like this whole time. But, you
Book
know, I
number
just
two.
have, I know I got so lucky with them,
Mm.
but it really illuminates for me like how yeah, I mean it's like everybody is different, so it's like it's not like a clinician can like apply some like consistent practice across the board and be like, okay, now we're trauma informed, now like survivors who are going to find this triggering are no longer going to find this triggering, but like they could just fucking ask us,
Mm.
because what you need and what I need are going to necessarily be different, but you could
Mm.
ask us. And even just asking says to a person like your needs matter and your needs count, um and you're an equal participant in this
Mm.
process too, you know. So yeah, I think a lot about that. I think a lot about that, and feel very passionately about that. And so yeah, I think, you know, learning to listen to that inner expert and then practicing advocating on behalf of that inner expert is so much of the work.
Definitely. Going back to your book, you mentioned the Me Too movement. I found it to be very empowering, actually, even though it's a very sad thing that these things are so common. But when it just seemed to be very therapeutic, knowing that there were so many stories out there that I wasn't any different. It was just, and how was that for you?
It was interesting. It was a real turning point in my work a lot because I in the years leading up had been writing online about, this is what it's like for me not really to remember my abuse, to like
Mm.
come to it in a later time in my life and try to be processing it. And when I wrote all of that, initially, it didn't get a lot of engagement. And I felt a little like, oh, maybe I'm like the only one here who feels this
Mm.
way. And then 2 years after the fact, when this like contemporary iteration of the Me Too movement like came to pass, my web traffic from articles from years past blew up and went insane. And I could see from the search engine optimization and all of that on Google, all these people, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people around the world, start Googling, like, is it possible to just now be remembering my abuse? Is it, is this, do I like, is my memory now like coming back? What is this? Can I trust this? And my work really blew up. And that's when I sort of became like, like, I felt like I had been confessing to my readership at the time, like, oh my God, maybe you guys don't think I'm a real survivor because I don't remember things the way you do. And then when at the height of the Me Too movement, it was like the one most important thing I could have put out in the world for people. And my inbox began to be flooded with people looking for support who were really re-traumatized by everything they were seeing every day in the news. And so I don't think I found that time personally like particularly re-traumatizing for me, but I did find it really overwhelming to be in community with so many people who were really struggling in a lot of ways, like openly for the first time in their lives. And I was really it was really it was like visceral. Felt like it was in the air.
Wow. So going to sex, I mean, this is a very big part of intimacy and our lives. And also
Yeah.
that's the kind of source of abuse. It's very hard. I mean, for other, areas of, let's say, struggle in life, let's say alcohol or drugs, people kind of like shut those things completely out of their lives. But sex is something that if, we experience in intimacy and love and in relationships. So do you have any tips or anything that you could share that you could, for people who are survivors to enjoy their bodies and their bodily autonomy and pleasure?
Absolutely. So I really have to credit here my friend Ignacio Rivera, who is the founder of the Heal Project here in the US. And Ignacio is a sex educator, is a child sex abuse survivor and advocate, and really advocates for what they call holistic sexuality healing, so, and that's a holistic sexuality education, from birth to death and then some. So Ignacio really was the first person to say to me, in this professional field, in the sexual violence field, a lot of conventional conversations around sexual abuse, they say, it's not about sex, it's about power and control.
Mm.
And Ignacio was the first person to say to me, it's also about sex.
Mm.
And that was really liberatory and eye-opening for me. Ignacio said, we have to talk about the fact that it was the nature of how we were harmed, but also for a lot of us, it was the first way we learned about sex.
Mm.
And we have to talk about that sexual healing aspect of our lives, not just the power and control and domination aspects of an abuse of power. And so, as you saw in the book, Ignacio is sort of the sexpert of my life and became the sexpert of this book. And I was so lucky to have them like lend their expertise to sort of talk through a lot of these big questions. And at its core, I wrote the chapter being like, okay, so there's this myth that we like have too much sex and that's a problem. And it means like we're
Mm.
fucked up and traumatized. And also we're not having enough sex and that's a problem. And it means we're fucked up and traumatized. And it's like there is, like there is so much pressure on survivors to feel like the sex we're having is some sort of like symptom of our harm, and
Mm,
that it's not also a part of our healing. And it can be both things at the same time. And so, one of the things I really wanted to introduce to people was this idea that, like, to take a little bit of the pressure and self blame that we experience so much as survivors, that we've been conditioned to feel, and step back and say, what is it that I actually want? And
mm,
is it okay to just allow for that to be something that I want? And also to say that yes, sex is a part of the way that I have been harmed. And also it's a part of the way that I'm healing. And
mm,
that is beautiful and powerful, because in my own life, I've had periods of time where I intentionally abstained from sex, and I found it like beautiful and liberatory and freeing and like spacious and powerful. And I have had times where I was like sleeping around and having one night stands and like having a great fucking time. And it felt liberatory
mm,
and empowering and amazing and full of agency. And then I've had a lot of experiences that were in the middle of those two things, and then a lot that were bad. And
mm,
it's like all of those things, I think we're so conditioned to be like, oh, she has daddy issues. He has daddy issues. Like they're so fucked up and they're so, like there's so much stigmatizing of people who have been harmed, who then are exploring their relationship to their sexual selves. And there's so much bullshit judgment. And it's like, I take real issue with like the daddy issues thing. It was something I was called during a period of, like as a slut shaming thing, but a period of time in my life when I was sleeping around a lot. And it's like, what a fast way to blame people for a harm that they didn't commit
mm,
and blame them for the ways they have figured out how to survive, how to heal, and how to live their own lives. Like, it's so cruel, but it's so indicative of the judgment that we experience. And so, my advice to people is yes, some of the things that we may like, prefer, or experience in sex, or not, or want to avoid in sex, might be rooted in the trauma we've experienced, but also perhaps that is not always a bad thing, and that can also be a part of our healing too.
mm.
And we don't have to like everything, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, and that's okay. And so my attitude is always like, how can we turn the judgment down, on the volume down, on this self-blame and this self-shame that tells us the ways that we have figured out how to survive, and the ways that we have figured out how to heal and explore our relationships to our bodies and repair our relationships to our sexual selves. How can we experience those things with more self-compassion, and less judgment?
Mm. I think it's also hard for someone if they have a partner who's gone through that. I mean, my advice for them would be to
Totally.
practice. I just saw Sex Education. Are you watching Sex Education on Netflix?
I
Because
haven't, but all my friends love it. Like
it's
I'm like the
brilliant.
outlier. I'm the outlier.
But
Yeah.
they talk about this thing called enthusiastic consent. And I think that's a really great
Yes.
thing, just to incorporate that in your practice, and just be like with every single stage of intimacy, and just to make sure you get that enthusiastic yes. And then so it gives you a lot of agency and over your experience then, and being okay with it
Yeah.
being a no or not yet or something like that. So I think that could
I
be
love
very,
that.
very cool. Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I think it's so pertinent to the work that you do as well. Like, I think that sex toys
Mm-hmm.
and play is such an important opportunity for us to explore ourselves and our relationships to our sexual selves in a way that is like really safe, and also under our own like jurisdiction and our own autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
The rule of thumb I like to offer to people is, if it feels healing to you, then it's healing.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with a survivor who was engaging in some role play, and some of that role play replicated some of the harm that she had experienced in childhood. And she was really worried that it meant something bad. And when we got to the core of it, it it was really clear. It actually felt like something important she needed to do for herself. and maybe not something she wants to do for the rest of her life. God knows, like the sex that I'm having right now, the lack thereof, because I'm pregnant and sick all the time. I really, really don't want my sex life to be reflective for the rest of my life of the reflective of the last year of my life. But so her desires may change and shift as our desires change and shift. But she was exploring something that felt really important to her, but she was afraid of the shame, not what it was feeling like inside for her, but rather this like shame that we've all been conditioned in. And I think it was important for her to hear, like, if it feels healing to you, then it's a part of your healing.
Yeah,
And
something
that's
I really
okay.
loved about your book is the part where it talks about religious communities and how the shame is belongs with your perpetrator and the communities who kept you silent. And that's a really, really important line. And I would, if I were you, I'd make that into a kind of Instagram post, because I think that's something that people need to hear a bit more often. That's a real underlying phrase of the book, and that's something I
I
will take with me,
appreciate that.
because I was brought up very Catholic, and all that thing doesn't happen in our community. I mean, all I've heard from Catholic communities, oh, it happens everywhere else, we're no different, and that's just like just the same in reverse, But it's just it's rife, and then people are very. That's just what before I talk about the very quick questions. I think there's a whole situation going on now in with Russell Brand. I don't know if you know.
Yes, of
And I think it's really
course.
interesting.
Yep.
I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of what I believe, but people are very quick to, I don't know the details, but very quick to um, dismiss the claims of these women and saying, why didn't they come forward? Or why? And I think some of them did it back in the day or what have you, but it's just,
Yeah.
it's not something that happens, then you go and report it. I mean, most abuse is not reported because it happens within families, and the implications of reporting those things are huge, not just for yourself, but as
Enormous.
a whole, all these family dynamics. And yeah, so that's, I mean, I'm not surprised people don't. Also, I think one big reason is you don't want to be reliving that trauma, because I did I had a court case, just a work situation, and then I had a situation where a gynecologist, I nearly died because of a gynecologist. Basically, it was a very, very,
Jesus.
yeah, it was serious. I left a tampon inside me for 2 months, for 1 month, and I went to the gynecologist and I didn't see it, and it's like, how can you not see it when I'm up in syrups and stuff? And
That's
then
insane.
and I was going to have my period this, and it's a very long story, but I could have basically taken legal action against
Mm-hmm.
his gynecologist, but I thought, do I really want to have these dossiers with stuff about my vagina in them and relive this thing for months on end? Or no, actually, I'm just going to let it go so it doesn't get reported. So I think a lot of abuse is
Absolutely.
kind of like that. You don't want to be kind of reliving this thing for months on end. And also, when I did a court case, which is a completely different thing, with work, that I had to go
Mm-hmm.
and see those people in the court, the waiting room outside. It's just so, so,
Totally.
so traumatic.
It's a whole different form of trauma on top of the trauma that we
Mm,
initially experienced. And it's why I feel so passionately when given the opportunity to talk with other survivors about this, to say, like, whatever choices you make around what I'll broadly call like accountability, I don't
mm,
even want to say justice because I feel like none of that is actually justice for us.
mm,
Um, but like next steps of like reporting or things like that, whatever choices you make, you have to make them in alignment with what you know you need for your safety and your healing, because these systems are totally fucked and totally designed to re-traumatize us. And yet we're sort of shamed, again,
mm.
theme of the day, shamed for shit that isn't our fault. We're shamed if we don't speak up, because then terrible people say that we're somehow like complicit in the harm because we didn't speak up. And yet if we speak up, then we haven't done it quote unquote correctly. We didn't do it in the right time frame. We didn't have the right evidence. We didn't seem believable enough. There's this myth of a perfect survivor, but it is a myth. Like none of us live up to it, and it's designed to keep us silent. And so what I always say to survivors is, like, do whatever you need to do for your safety and your well-being, whether it's speaking or not speaking to about your abuse to family members, to systems of accountability, to whatever it is. Like, you got to take care of you
Mm.
and decide what you need to do for yourself, because no one else can make those decisions for you.
Mm. And
Only you know that.
If people have even more guilt thinking if I don't report, then they're going to carry on doing it
Exactly.
and you're responsible for it somehow.
As though you're responsible for your abuser,
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's
it's
terrible.
not people's fault that they feel that way. Like, people actually see that shit to survivors.
Mm.
That's the other thing, is like, we didn't invent this pressure. We didn't invent feeling this way. Like, people told us that bullshit. And then it's like, wait, how is it my fault that my abuser is abusing? You know what I mean? Like, it's
Mm.
so ass backwards.
Mm.
But the responsibility lies with the abuser and people of equal power to that abuser.
Definitely.
That's who is responsible.
A couple of quick questions for you. What's the book that changed your life?
Um, I would say the book that changed my life was a memoir, the most beautiful memoir. It was Janet Mock's Redefining Realness. I read it when I was extremely lost,
Mhm.
the year before I created Healing Honestly, and it really inspired me to create Healing Honestly. So Janet Mock is she is a writer, she is a TV producer, she helped create the show Pose, if you're familiar with that. She's a Black trans woman who has played a lot of different sort of roles in media writ large, and is a real creative force. And she wrote a memoir about her experiences growing up as a Hawaiian Black trans girl in Hawaii and in Texas, and her path to sort of embracing who she is and in all of her senses of her identity. And I listened to the book at a time in my life when I couldn't have been more lost. And it really showed me that, like, with great specificity comes like infinite understanding and compassion. Like, she told her story without having to necessarily explain herself. She just told it in her own details and in her own way. And I felt so connected to that. And I was like, wow, this is the power of like people telling their own stories in their own words. And it also, it it just showed me that, these stigmatizing topics that are so silenced, that actually through like beautiful personal storytelling, like, we can really create human connection around them. And I like I'm so grateful that that memoir came into my life when it did. It like 100% inspired me to start my website and start Healing
Amazing.
Honestly.
What's the phrase or affirmation that you live by?
Be who you needed when you were
Oh,
younger,
that's
for
amazing.
sure.
I thought that when you said it earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a great one. That's a great thing to make another thing on Instagram. We didn't do it
Yeah.
already, but I think that's really great. A great quote.
Thank you.
So where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me at healinghonestly.com. They can also find me on Instagram at Aliza Healing Honestly. So it's at ALISA Healing Honestly, HealingHonestly. So at Aliza Healing Honestly. And then you can purchase a copy of Healing Honestly wherever books are sold, whether through independent bookstores or through Amazon or anything in between.
Perfect. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this lovely conversation.
In this episode, I'm not going to review a book as I normally do in every episode. That's because I'm still reading the same book as in my last episode. But I'm nearly finished, so by the next time I'm here, there will be a new book review. I wanted to talk about a series that I've been watching instead, and it's called Tell Me You Love Me on HBO. And this series has had a profound effect upon me. And I discovered it because I was talking to a colleague about the fact that I had just hosted a webinar about sex and aging. And this colleague told me, well, I've just seen Tell Me You Love Me on HBO, which addresses aging sex, or there is a therapist in it who is quite of an advanced age, and she is sexually active, probably more active than some of the other characters. And this series has a lot of sex in it. So if you like watching sex scenes, that's what it is. But these just sex scenes have definitely justified. They're not just salacious. They're very justified within the storyline. And it's about three couples who go to see this older therapist, and they all have their own different sexual problems. For example, there's a younger woman who is about to get married, and then she discovers that her fiance would potentially struggle with monogamy. So that kind of raises a lot of doubts in her mind about how she sees their future and how she cannot commit to someone who's not, only seeing her in his erotic horizons. And then she goes on this journey of, kind of having sex with different people and, to express the pain, I suppose. And then there's another couple who are trying for a baby. So we see this side of sexuality that becomes very automatic, for example, and then the failing, when you're trying every month and then you're getting these, you're getting your period and it becomes a very tedious activity. And I mean, I cannot imagine what that must be like. I've never been in a position where I've wanted to have children, because for me, if that were to happen, I would want it to be a miraculous accident. It's not something I would provoke, but it would be something that I would be open to if it surprised me. I just think, imagine, turning sex into some kind of, what day am I ovulating? It just seems like it could take the beauty out of intimacy and becomes very automatic. And you can see the tension that is creating in the couple, and the fact that, the woman's seeing, oh, ovulating now, come upstairs, and he's, eating a sandwich, and he has to kind of like leave the sandwich and go and shag her and just be kind of on demand whenever she wants. And then sex ceases to become some kind of joyful, intimate act. It's something very automatic. And then you have that recurring disappointment of it not being successful. So I can imagine that could be, very, very, very hard for a couple to experience. I know people who are friends of mine who are also trying for children, and it really, it takes its toll on their emotional life and their sexual life. It's just, very dull. And this couple are going to see the therapist to address. And it's also bringing up a lot of their issues around other areas of their relationship. It's provoking a lot of tension. And then there was another couple who have been together for about, something like 12 years, and they have children of, maybe 8 and 10. And they've not had sex for a year. So there's all of that tension of the absence of sex and how important it is. And for me, this series is not about sex. It's about the emotional implications that sex has on a relationship, the experiencing of sex, and also the absence of it. And that's what I find incredibly interesting, because sexuality is so important in our lives, in our intimate lives, and yet we are too ashamed to address it. So if you're interested in the concept of sexuality, and especially the emotions behind it, I would highly recommend this series. I don't want to go into it too much. I don't want to give you any spoilers, but it's fascinating to see how these stories unravel. There are 10 episodes, and it's very realistic. And the sex scenes kind of surprised me, because there's some full frontals and and sometimes, sexual disasters as well. It's not all orgasmic. There are some encounters that are quite raw and that do go wrong. So emotions and sexuality, fascinating. So I highly recommend Tell Me Love Me on HBO. And if you have any series to recommend to me, please let me know, because it gets to that point where you have these streaming platforms, and then you've seen everything you want to see, and then there's just nothing to watch, even though there seems to be an abundance of offer. But for me, I am not interested in watching things that have any type of violence or thrillers. I want to see sexuality, I want to see love, I want to see romance, and I want to see emotion. So if you know of anything that ticks those boxes, please let me know, because I need something else to entertain me during these cold winter nights. So that's what I recommend for you. Tell Me You Love Me on HBO. Now it's time to slow things down as we prepare for this episode's guided affirmations meditation. It's probably not a good idea to listen to this while driving or operating machinery. Instead, take a break from whatever you're doing, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and enjoy. I am a survivor, and I am thriving. I have the courage to face my past and the hope to create my future. I have overcome challenges before, and I will overcome them again. I am resilient, strength and ability to heal. I am a survivor and I am in control of my life. I am a beacon of inspiration for others. I am a survivor and I am thriving. I have the courage to face my past and the hope to create my future. Every challenge I face makes me stronger. I choose to focus on my growth and healing. I am empowered. I am capable of creating a better future. I am a beacon of inspiration for others. I am a survivor and I am thriving. I have the courage to face my past and the hope to create my future. I am worthy of love, happiness, and all the good things life has to offer. I am a warrior and I will conquer any obstacle in my path. I embrace my scars. They are proof of my strength. I let go of my past pain. I am a beacon of inspiration for others. I am a survivor and I am thriving. I have the courage to face my past and the hope to create my future. I am resilient and I bounce back from any adversity with grace. I am a survivor and I choose to thrive in the face of adversity. I am capable of turning my pain into purpose. I trust my inner wisdom to guide me through life's challenges. I am a beacon of inspiration for others. Are you looking for a new sex toy? If you are, go to satisfier.com and you can use the code Venus to get 30% off anything on the satisfier.com website. So check it out, Venus for 30% off, satisfier.com. To find out more about me and my orgasmic lifestyle, visit venusohara.org or follow me on Instagram at instagram.com/venusohara. Make sure to search for the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast by Venus O'Hara in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, have an orgasmic week, and make sure every day is a climax.